Okay, hi, thank you guys all so much for coming. We're just gonna start our presentation. So we are the ONRC field crew from UW for this 2023 season. And my name's Paisley.
I'm Evan.
I'm Nina.
I'm Giovanna.
And I'm Anna. And the first study that we kind of helped out with as interns was the ethnoforestry site. And I guess an overview of the experiment, to begin, we should define ethnoforestry. It's really a people-focused forest management strategy. So that means we consider the needs of both the people actively involved in logging, so that'd be the logging companies and the state departments, but also the people who live in the areas where logging is occurring, and making sure that their interests are represented as well. And this is really implemented in the experiment through two different types of treatments. We have vegetation treatments and browse control treatments. And really those treatments are applied to see how they affect the growth of new trees after logging has been done. So under vegetation treatments, we have agroforestry, which is a mix of understory plants and Douglas fir. The purpose of the agroforestry treatment is just to see if understory is going to be beneficial or non-beneficial to the Douglas fir as it's growing. And this represents like the needs of the community because a lot of people do harvest understory plants to make a living or as a side hustle. The next vegetation treatment is early cereal management. So that's a mixture of understory plants, Douglas fir, and red alder. The reason why we include red alder in this treatment is because it's nitrogen fixing and it's deciduous. So when it loses all its leaves, those leaves create ground cover that could potentially be beneficial to the Douglas fir. And the last is a control. So only Douglas fir, and that is the industry standard in logging. And then for browse control treatments, the first treatment we have is wildlife fencing. This is the most effective treatment to prevent animals from browsing on the trees, but it's the most expensive also, just in terms of materials and the labor. Next we have treated, so areas sprayed with like liquid repellent such as plant skid. The benefit of plant skid is that it's much cheaper than wildlife fencing, but it's harder to implement because you have to spray it 4 times a year. And you have to spray it in a period where there's like no rain for 24 hours, which of course is very difficult here on the peninsula. And then, yeah. And then the last treatment is of course none, and that's industry standard. So with the vegetation and browse control treatments combined, we have a series of 9 unique treatments, as you can see in the figure on the right.
Can you talk about where this is?
Yeah.
A lot of the folks here probably know.
Can you explain? Yeah, so the ethnoforestry site is kind of located right off of the Locust Road. It is DNR land, I believe, and it's very close to like a lot of Rainier, like the logging company land as well. But yeah, just right off of Locust Road,
So it's the
main line trail.
It's the Goodman Main Line.
Yeah, the Goodman Main Line
Just
Road.
across the Still Bridge. And then around.
Yeah.
around-
Skokie Bridge will be there.
How big is the plot? 3 to 9 plots.
That is a good question. Well, there's around each plot there's a 5-meter buffer as well, and then the actual plot itself is Allie. Courtney.
A tenth of an acre.
Say it one more time, Courtney.
A tenth of an acre.
An acre is the size of each tree plot, and then a 5-meter buffer around them. Yeah. Yeah, and then there's 9 plots per experimental unit.
9 plots, what?
There's 9 plots for every experimental unit, and then there are 3 replicates of those plots. So there are a total of 27 plots is like in total. Yeah.
What are the others?
Yes.
What is the browse control? What are the primary things you're trying to defend against?
Yeah, so that would be
Deer,
ungulates.
bears?
So essentially hoofed animals that eat vegetation, so deer and elephant primarily.
What bears?
Bears?
On the birds.
I don't know if bears are a primary concern.
Bears attack and.
15 years old.
Yeah.
Bears are a problem.
Certainly when like the trees are larger,
Yeah.
that very.
Yeah,
these trees are very small, and they're small saplings, yeah, very, yeah.
We see lots of bears on the wildlife cameras that are up there.
No questions. Move on. So for our tools and methods, one of the things we did were understory plots. So we set out like these 1.5 meter poles and make like a little square. And within that square, we'd measure the species diversity. So we're looking at species richness how many different species are there and species evenness. So how much of this square is like composed of a certain species. The next thing we were doing was connecting to LiDAR, which is a form of remote sensing. It's kind of similar to aerial photography if you're familiar with like Google Maps or Google Earth at all. Kind of the same idea, but it's a different technology. And kind of the instruments we were using to connect to LiDAR were the Haglock, which you'll see a lot in this presentation. It's just a really, really fancy measuring tape, basically, that uses ultrasonic waves to measure distance and azimuth. And then the other thing we used was called a Javad, or at least we call it a Javad. And that's essentially a GPS. So it connects to, I think, both American and Russian satellites, right?
Yeah, it's Russian.
Yeah, and so part of that, part of that is just to make sure that we can connect like where we place our instruments correctly to the LiDAR, but also to improve our maps for future use. And then the last thing we did in the ethnoforestry site were seedling measurements. So that's just measuring the height of the trees and the root collar, which is just the diameter at the base of these like really short seedlings or saplings.
These are 2-year-old seedlings?
I believe actually 3. Two were planted in 2020, 2021.
Yeah.
They were planted in 2020. Yeah, very tiny. Yeah. And then in terms of our experiences, this was like one of the first studies we participated in as interns. So we were getting used to identifying a lot of the plants on the Pacific or on the peninsula. We regularly used a POJAR, as we call it, or just like a guidebook. And also getting used to calling things by their USDA codes, which is just like the first two letters of the genus and the first 2 letters of the species put together. The other thing is allergies. The ethnoforestry site was like completely filled with these yellow flowers called pericassier. And at the end of the day, like we'd walk out of the field and from the knee down, our pants were just covered in pollen. So for me at least, it was a very fun experience getting to have very bad allergic reactions to that pollen. And the last thing is the wildlife. So here pictured is a slug, but we saw all sorts of things, especially elk, because we were seeing them browsing on the trees. And there was like a golden eagle that kept following us from plot to plot.
What was that book you were referring to? But we have that. What was that book? Was that your reference?
Yeah, so we call it a POJAR,
Which is just the name of the author.
yeah, but it's the plants of the Pacific Northwest coast.
Right, we have it.
Yeah.
It's kind of the standard guidebook for alongside items, so yeah.
Authors are from DC.
The next study we worked on was the long-term ecosystem productivity study. A little bit of an overview. The long-term ecosystem productivity study, we will shorten that to LTEP during this presentation, focuses mainly on forest management techniques and their effectiveness in long-term forest management productivity. There's a lot of things that go down in this forest. So they look at the growth of trees, regeneration of understory plants and biodiversity, the effect of forest woody debris on tree growth, seedling growth, and soil health. This forest study has been going on since the 1990s. So we're just taking apart and gathering data towards future studies. We've been focusing mainly on wind growth, which is the borders around the plots. They get pretty heavily impacted by wind, and we would go into these plots, take measurements of the trees, and see how much of an impact wind growth had on their growth. We looked at 3 different treatments. We have an early seral grouping, which is Douglas fir and red alder, mid seral, which is only Douglas fir, and late seral, which is heavily thinned forest. What's that?
Yeah, do you have a question?
Had it been commercially thin or just?
Yes, I think so. This is on, DNR land, so.
I think it's like this.
Yeah, that was the sound.
Been back in the nineties.
This is plot up by Sappho, right?
Yeah, this is my Sabo, yeah.
And then, given that logging as well, we also had, like wood treatments that I don't think we were like, for the completion mentioned that there was also like a woody debris. I guess, like range for each unit had in terms of abundance of woody debris as well, after the thinning, which is kind of has to do with the treatment options.
Here's a little map of what, the plots we're working on looks like. We have some controls. Those are pretty rare. We liked working on those because they're nice and easy to walk through. Then we have the Douglas fir and early, mid, and late Cyril, which are varying levels of difficult to walk through, which is why, hence the beginning slide of our beef with Western hemlock, because they grow in pretty dense when we get to late Cyril, so it's pretty difficult to walk through. Yeah. All right, tools and methods. Going back to our Javad, we used our GPS again, working in this study to try to georeference all of our findings. We used our Hagloff just to georeference all of the trees in reference to the center point of each of our plots.
Yeah.
We used a tablet and compass because we got lost pretty frequently. Since the forests are so dense, it's pretty hard to find our way around. So we have lovingly pictured our Giovanna here. She is the one who helped navigate us for the most part during our time in LTEP. And then tagging supplies. We would flag smaller trees with just removable flagging tape with pink and black stripes. And then for the bigger trees, we would put a hammer and nail just to number them for future reference. So our method pretty vaguely was we would set up a plot boundary. We would tag trees over 10 centimeters in DBH, which is just the diameter at breast height. Then we record this DBH distance and the azimuth for each tree. And then we would flag all the smaller trees. And then we would set the Javad running for 20 minutes while we did all of our tree work. Some fun stuff we got up to while we're in LTEP. Since it was so rough, our lovely Anna set up some LTEP surprises where every day she would come up with like a little game. Like she had some riddles set up, some forks trivia, and then at the end she always had like a little prize or something. So shout out to Anna for making LTEP super fun for us, making it really exciting. And then of course we got lost a lot. Some plots just didn't exist.
Yeah.
So shout out to Alan for coordinating everything. So yeah, a lot of fun.
I wanted to present a little bit on our intended plan to go to Willamette. Unfortunately, it was canceled due to the bedrock fires, but I just thought it would be nice to mention that our intent in going there and what our general plan was. So the goal was to head to H.J. Andrews' LTEP site, and this was the site of the 2020 Holiday Farm Fires, which happened over Labor Day weekend in 2020, and unfortunately burned around half of the units. So our goal was to study the post-burn response in the overstory and the understory, and also test new monitoring approaches by linking the ground truthing data to LiDAR, which is a pretty common theme throughout research this summer. And the goal was to remeasure all of this, but unfortunately it didn't happen. Just thought we should mention it. Instead, what we did is we made our way back to LTEP. Thankfully, we had a little reconciliation with the Western hemlock. We're friends now again. But some of the tools we use, of course, you've heard this before, is the Javad, the Hagloff, and then also PPT for understory plots, the Pojar, again, tablet, compass, clipboards, and then tagging supplies. We did use spray paint a lot in these plots rather than a metal tag. And then for the smaller trees, we used just regular flagging tape. What we were mainly looking for in LTEP this time was we were looking at the regions, in each unit that where the buffer faced the road, because we were really interested in gathering data on potential like edge effects, on each of the units. So we called these edge plots, and they are circular plots with a 10-meter radius from the road, walking 10 meters, and then there would be one rebar in the ground with PVC and then a tag on it, and then you would go 10 meters out from that radius, or from that center point. We tagged all trees that had a DBH over 3.5 with this spray paint or flagging tape. And then we also had within each edge plot, we had 2 understory plots, and those were 3 by 3 meters. And within those, we looked for a ground cover and percent cover, like in ethnoforestry. But one thing that was different is we also looked at biomass using a biomass booklet that someone else actually made. It was very cool to me. And then these are just a few pictures from some of our experiences. It was very exciting. We found trail mushrooms. Actually, Ali found them, which I thought was very cool. And these are just some pictures of us setting up some grid posts, having to use our compass and then the distance tape to try to walk on an avenue that's like straight as possible. And us just, you know, with our tools, a really big overview. Yeah, so just a few of our experiences that week. And then we also had the opportunity to go actually to Bernard's house in Port Angeles. So this kind of became another cedar hunt situation. Our goal was to gather more LiDAR visible cedars around Bernard's property for ground truthing data so that we could create STEM maps. And these plots were plots there, also circular with a 10-meter radius. However, we use metal tags, and we tagged all trees over 3.5 dBH. And then again, we used Tagoff and Javad for the sake of like STEM mapping. And then one thing that we also collected that was really interesting were trees with very severe leans. So this was primarily like alders, because they kind of grow towards the sun. So we were wanting to gather extra data on them to make sure that we had really accurate STEM maps for where they were.
And pictured right there is
Oh,
Cello.
and yes,
Bernard's
there's
dog.
Cello, which is very
Who's
important.
very cute.
Yes, that's Cello, who was our guide.
All right, one of the next areas we ventured out to was the OESF, the Olympic Experimental State Forest and Olympic National Forest land. What we did in this area was basically what we call our Great Cedar Hunt to help out Allie and her thesis and all the collaborators she's working on to basically train a model to like be able to detect Western red cedars if they have like drone LiDAR flown over. And if you didn't get it yet, LiDAR basically what it does sends out lasers to the ground. The impulses strike back, and you can kind of get like a 3D almost visual of what the land looks like. So we're basically trying to train a model, a computer basically, to see what we can see with our eyes, just to make it easier and more efficient to do some monitoring with trees in the long run. So that is the overview of why we did this. And the plot locations were in the T3 watershed experiments and also forest land around Lake Quinault. We also collected additional data while we were in the area just to help out with other projects going on and other people affiliated with ONRC, just since we were there to make it all more efficient, since that is the long-term goal of everything. And the tools and methods are pretty similar to the past 2 plots that we discussed. Basically using Javad, Havelock, all that data to get positional data, since that is extremely important when it comes to LiDAR, since we're basically trying to know exactly where we are so the model can detect what we saw on the ground. And we also use a CV because we were driving on forest roads, which is one of the more deadly things we've been doing this summer, along with, next slide, please, a bunch of these things. While we were in these areas, we unfortunately encountered lots of groundness, and what we got the most out of T3 was probably 19 bee stings total.
Yeah. Well, for this whole
summer,
season,
yeah.
yeah.
But as you can see, there are very steep areas there, so we did a lot of work just to get to these little cedars, so they're extremely important to us and what we've been doing this summer. One thing it did for me at least was resurface some PTSD from a bad encounter hiking last year, and we also got familiar with a lot of logger lingo and southern accents on the CB radio. We also got some pretty torrential downpour on one of our last few days in the area. We're drenched completely.
When was that?
Where we got the bad rain.
When did you get wet? When?
It was a few weeks ago. We were in some of the young states, so
Yeah.
it was like no canopy cover.
It was
No-
Monday, Tuesday, I know that.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
only like
It was a long Monday, Tuesday.
Yeah.
It was a long week.
One of the few days it was like raining it more.
Yeah, you're really lucky. You only have maybe 3 or 4 like rainy days all summer, so. Can't complain.
This was also in an area with a lot younger stands,
Yeah.
so we did hear a lot of amazing, we're gonna have a bunch of cover.
Yeah.
And like the underbrush would like gather raindrops.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
It's good.
It's good. Okay.
And yeah, here's just some photos from our experience in LTEP. On the left, we have measuring DBH, diameter of breast, ways to get information on this stroke. And then just putting on boots in the morning. We showed up a few times, kind of a little bit late, almost ready to get the day going. It was a rough start going to T3 and all that, but yeah. This was one of the trends down
sorry.
in the corner there. Paisley had a little backpack cover on that made it look like a turtle.
Yeah.
It worked really well.
Alright, continuing on.
And so our last project that we're working on this summer is actually with Washington State DNR. We have a few of them here. So thank you guys for coming. And we are studying and working with them on an ongoing project that is monitoring riparian systems and specifically the buffers. The buffers are really important because modern regulation requires with logging, a buffer to be maintained along the edge of a stream to preserve different properties. They're really important for like providing trees provide nutrients to the stream ecosystems and vice versa. And they also provide shade, which decreases water temperature. There's a lot of fish that are really, really sensitive to water temperature, especially for like, I think they use it like for navigational skills and stuff like that. And then they also help the root structures help reduce soil erosion and runoff. So helps reduce sediment. That should be good. But what we were studying specifically was just to more clearly understand the role of these buffers. There's not like a ton of like data built up on how they are actively affecting the fish populations and the habitat themselves. So the goal of this is just to, in the future, have more data to back up policy. And for the methodology that we use, we are kind of dividing up the stream with nets. We're like cutting it off at like 100-meter junctions. So like a net upstream and downstream to stop the fish and keep it a contained space. And then we use an electrofishing backpack, which Nina is demonstrating very snazzily in the bottom right. And very heavy backpack with 2 rods. You walk around in the pool and stick it in, and you zap the fish, just a little stun. Then you scoop them up and put them in the bucket, and they start squiggling around in the bucket. And you take them back, give them a little anesthesia, so they stop squiggling so much, and take some measurements of like species, weight, length, and for the bigger fish, we take like a little genetic sampling to be monitored back in the lab. And then we also, afterwards, return the fish to the test pools. And the second part of it is just studying habitat surveys. So doing like studying the physical characteristics of the stream, like doing a pebble count, which is just kind of checking the rocks and pools to see the size, granular size. We also study the temperature of the water and light penetration through the tree canopy, which are very much linked. And then we also like divide up the stream that we are monitoring into different segments by like classification, like what kind of stream it is. So like a ripple is a pretty like shallow gradient with like medium movement of water, and then rapids are like bigger boulders, faster water. Pools are just standing water, and then steps like drop down like a step. Yeah. And then our experiences with this, it's been pretty steep hikes down with pretty heavy gear. Probably the heaviest gear we've had so far, because we have to have the electrofishing backpack and nets and the poles, lots of different equipment. And it's been pretty hot, but luckily we get the amazing cooling powers of the water in the streams. It's so nice down there, and the winds kind of coming through. So once we get down there, it's really comfortable. And then we also get to collaborate with an awesome DNR crew. They've been really helping us out and giving us lots of guidance with their experience. So really nice.
And that's me wearing the electrofishing backpack on the right there. It's just a bigger picture of it, basically.
Yeah.
Where were these streams?
These things are all in T3.
Yeah, this is in the T3 watershed experiment, in the OESF. So down kind of pure water area.
These pictures are all from mainline. if that
Yeah,
makes
also,
sense. These are just some pictures of our experiences just this summer, a lot of camping and heading to the beach, a little bit of tide pooling as well. And then exploring forks and, just like the peninsula in general, like that's a picture of us at Lake Crescent, down by the river. This is the Hudson DNR land, us in the Timber Museum.
Where we're certified
Yes.
vampire docents,
Yeah.
because we can't. Treasure hunt, no one else, just you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, and a few more pictures. Unfortunately, we've had some incidences. Some broken jams, some broken soy sauce, some broken plates, but it's all very clean. There are no stains, we promise.
Yeah,
And then also
I think
we formed a band. Yeah. Not a very good one. Good
Yeah.
songs yet. And we want to give you guys also thank you for coming, and then specifically to the ONRC staff and other lodgers. Special shout out to Ali and Courtney and Bernard. You guys have been great, and we really appreciate you guys and hosting us. Thank you.
Are you done for the year? Are you going, is this ongoing anymore?
We have 2 more days in the field. We're still doing the electrofishing with DNR, but after that, we're done.
Were you housed down here?
Yeah, we're actually staying at ONRC, like this facility.
Yeah, pretty. So you drive all the way down to Clearwater?
Yep, yeah, it's about an hour to an hour and a half usually for the T3. LTEP is in Sappho, so it's a lot closer, maybe 30 minutes, so. Yeah, we spent honestly the majority of our summer, I would say, in LTEP. If you split it up, it was a lot more LTEP than T3.
Got a question?
Hey, yeah, so, the thing I see on state lands, young plantations, as well as on private commercial land now, and you alluded to this in the very first part of the presentation, was treatment before planting to control vegetation that might compete with young seedlings. Everybody seems to be doing this now, and my question is, if you clear cut harvest, there's a response to that, and there are plants that come back, maybe some salmon berries, some sword ferns, and, over time, a few more sprinkle in, but in those first couple of years, you've got just the beginning of that. Then you come in and you herbicide treat it, and then you kill everything that's green. I'd like to see a component of what that does to the ability to control fire. Number one, I have a doubt that, you plant a tree starts off and it's growing in top, a little bit of soil, like the time it's 10 years old, it's gone down. Those little brush species, they're all growing on top. So in 10 years time or 15 years time, does it really make a significant difference in the height growth of those trees? One compared to a non-treated area. Everybody seems to be doing it like it's the fad, but it's certainly keeps populations at bay because there's nothing. And I just had firsthand experience of when you drown it out and then you have a forest fire, just get the hell out of the way because it's going to burn at a higher rate because there's left nothing green out there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, interesting with the ethnoforestry study, what impact any of the understory plants have on the beach.
Because that seems to be the reason for the herbicide treatment, is that competition. I think it's a very short-term thing, if at all. Anyway.
Well,
Does
that's primarily they've got to get Douglas fir a head start.
No.
Did For the first 30 years, I was, that's what I'm comparing.
So just, yeah.
If we never did that, we've got, there's thousands of acres of good plantations, and yeah, there's competition, but, at the same time, there's,
Yeah.
except for North Slopes, and maybe today when you're,
Yeah, this is for.
final harvesting a stand that could have been commercial thin 5 years prior, then you've got lots of, advanced brush species, but on the typical 45-year-old clear cut, I don't see that as an imminent danger or stopping point for those trees.
Did I ask when will your data all be compiled and be looked at?
It's, I think, pretty much ongoing. We've been compiling and then putting it into Excel and all that kind of also computers can be used and processed and clean. Sort of
Yeah.
throughout the summer, I would say it's mostly been on Courtney and Allie more so than us, the interns. We've done a little bit of that. But I guess maybe Allie can feel this more, but specifically for the teeter and cedar stuff, I think pretty soon because it's gonna be used for Allie's master's work, which is gonna be within the next year at least. I'm not as sure on LTAP.
Oh, yeah, Bernard has a question on Zoom.
Yeah.
Maybe Bernard will answer it. Or Bernard has.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, very nice presentation. It was delightful. Really appreciate it. I think it's probably worth mentioning that there was a very interesting question about herbicide use, and I'll just say that in our big study on the T3 watersheds, we actually are looking into that. We have a number of treatments with and without herbicide, and we will be able to try to address some of those questions that you asked in a replicated trial. So that's great that we're answering questions that people are interested in.
I guess that was just less than our focus this summer.
Yeah.
Is there any thought to putting some kind of a little permanent marker out on the long-term site productivity grid, just so that you wouldn't spend time being lost in hemlock doghair, and you could hit the GPS button and boom, walk right to the center pin of a given plot?
Yeah, honestly, that's the one that I bought.
Yeah.
Honestly, one of the reasons I think we had difficulties this summer is because last year some Java data was not recorded or lost. Something happened with our Java data last year. So we didn't have maybe the most, I don't know, maybe this is incorrect, but perhaps we would have had better maps and idea of where we were going, but the actual rebar was out there
Yeah.
potentially. But although it was a challenge to navigate, I think the use of our compasses and then the events app, which was on our tablet, were pretty helpful. It was mostly issues with corner plots and not being able to find grid posts in the corners, specifically in the width rows. So
And that was mainly because they actually didn't exist.
they were not with it, yeah.
It was not there.
Yeah.
The winter plots were especially interesting because we didn't have the data on how many were fitted and where. Because it was like an add-on study to the original study. And so the Pico Trail was a little bit.
And you have to add the LTIP is actually significantly organized. I really enjoyed walking through it. It's just the first time we were in the field, we basically were in LTIP. We didn't really have any navigational practice because we went from very open surroundings where you can see everything. So all of a sudden you have all these things in your face and everything. So
Like a bunch of
because
trees.
we weren't oriented with the area and didn't really know exactly how the plots were organized, but once we did, it was very quick going and super satisfying, honestly, to
By the end of the
find
summer.
everything. We were good. We were probably,
Is the Javad live? Does it give live data? It doesn't.
It doesn't have
You have to go
any
back.
screen or anything.
So- Are you guys using handheld GPSs? Just like the-
No.
It's just like compass.
Compass, yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
That's favorite.
Yeah.
Basic, but it's.
we found today with
I can
coordinates
get
though,
that.
that we had the same 3 coordinates in the streams for areas
Very far.
very far away from each other, so I don't know how much.
I think our
guess
compass
the
might be a
GPS
little more
even-
accurate.
Yeah, I think they've tried the governments in the past and found that they weren't quite accurate enough to find the rebars, yeah.
I just used one yesterday on motorcycle. But
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Maybe they should work better.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, so you were talking about a post-fire recovery study that was canceled because of the fire.
Yes.
Does that affect your actual plots?
That would be a question probably for Fournier Alley.
The new fire that's happening right now has not hit the experiment yet.
Okay.
It's just like 3 miles away, like way it's close by, so it's close enough, and it's at like 14,000 acres, I think, last I checked. And it was like 20% contained or something. So yeah, so far it's closed, but it hasn't hit the experiment again. Yeah. Let's do it.
Any other questions?
Could you turn the PowerPoint slide off so the Zoom folks can kind of like see more of the room?
Oh. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
There we go. Yeah, any questions from Zoom as well?
Oh. Well done, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, I've got an idea. I want to hear from Isak. He's one of our interns from a number of years ago, and he's now at Yale University, as I understand it, doing forestry studies there. Can you tell us how you're doing, Isak?
I'm doing good. It's a little bit late on the East Coast, but it brought me great joy hearing you all talk about the LTAP study and the T3 study. I would definitely not be here at Yale without the ONRC and all the amazing field experiences that I had there. So you all learned a lot, and it was exciting for you all to share it. Yeah, I'm curious, what were your favorites? Did you go on and see how that survive process went for you, or if they've finally gotten rid of it? Because I know that kicked my butt my first year. So yeah, curious to hear your thoughts on what were your favorite parts of.
Do you just go around?
Yeah, we can just I would say the plots that stood out to me the most were ones that I found really cool understory species in. Like, I found an orchid in one of our like understory plots and one of the edge plots, and that was really exciting for me. I talked about it the rest of the day. So probably LTAP and maybe some of the more open areas where I found some cool understory plants for some of my faves.
Mine was actually also in LTEP. We had to establish some windrow plots, and to do this, you basically just go off of measurements. So you just measure out like 5 meters from a grid post and you stick something there, and then you have to go and find all the other 4 corners, except you are establishing them. So you're just going off of a little
Is this the same?
Yeah. A logger's tape or a logger's tape that you just carry with you.
Yeah, survey's tape.
Yeah, surveyor's
Yeah.
tape. There was a photo earlier where Paisley had her compass in hand, and like the distance tape in front, that was like a method I found super useful. You just walk through. But then there's all these logs in front of you too, so you have to like climb up them. And I was like getting super acrobatic getting through it, and I absolutely loved it. And then it was so satisfying because I reached the other corner and I'd be like perfectly where I should have been.
Yeah.
And it was very satisfying.
It was the most beautiful plot, actually. I take it back. That was my favorite. That was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, not the prettiest plot or anything, but the most satisfying in terms of what I got out of it.
I really like T3 doing the cedar hunts, because a lot of the trees were huge and taking the DVH was always really fun. Even if we had to measure out a big slope or something, but I don't know. And also spray painting is fun, so that's my favorite.
Yeah, I'd probably also say T3, like the cedar hunt was really fun. That's just like the iconic, like what you picture of when you're being in the forest taking data on trees. It's just like, it was so cool in there, these massive cedars. You got one that was like 290 something centimeters, just enormous. Like it took several tapes to get around it. It was massive.
National Forest land.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Shout out to National Forest. Thank you.
And they're all very big.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that was really pretty. Yeah, hard to work through, very steep and stuff, but
It's also where you got 7 wasp stings.
Eight.
Oh,
yeah.
8.
7 or 8, yeah, on my ankles, that was fun.
Yeah, that's still debated.
Yeah. There were so many, I wasn't quite sure how many.
Yeah.
Kind of lost count.
I don't know. I can't really say that I have a favorite. I will say, I think I'm the only person who enjoyed doing LTEP or late Cyril, because I'm a bit of a masochist. And I enjoyed putting together the LPEP surprises, but also like, I don't know, the late Cyril just looks so weird. Like, I've never seen a forest that looked like that had so many like small trees in like close proximity to each other. So I guess for me, I guess I'll be different. Yeah, I'll say I'll tell the late Cyril is my favorite.
So Ally, tell us about the cedar. Your cedar, project.
Project, yeah. Yeah, that's been, I think that was also my favorite part of the summer, was getting cedar data. And as they mentioned, so for my thesis, the overarching goal is to using LiDAR to promote sensing to map western red cedars across large areas. So basically, we have all this ground data that we got this summer, and then we've been having actually working with Westbrook Environmental, who's been flying us gorgeous drone LiDAR flights, and we're going to connect that ground data that we have to the LiDAR data and be able to isolate individual trees. And then using that information, we can train a computer model who we can then feed more drone LiDAR, and ideally it'll be able to identify cedars across a larger landscape than what we had ground data for. And so for right now, we're actually looking on a grant proposal with the Prelude. This whole project actually came into being because Courtney was talking with some tribal members about like what they wanted on the landscape, and so the big one. We've also just been talking with a lot of other people, and cedar's really huge, and there's a lot less of it on the landscape, from like the monoculture to like the climate and all the heat stress. And so hopefully this project will be able to locate more cedar on the larger areas, both for tribal and also just general management purposes.
So is that part of that for, cedar bark harvesting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the LiDAR can go across and when it does its picture, it can tell species too, from straight up, right?
Yeah, that's the goal. Theoretically, I mean, they say that if you can see it like on the, I'll take a step back. So with LiDAR, what it does is with drone LiDAR, you like fly a drone over, and like Javon mentioned this a little bit earlier, but it sends laser pulses back. It sends laser pulses down to the ground, and those bounce back on the canopy and low and hit the ground as well. And with that,
a diagram if people want to.
oh, sure, yeah. And from that, you go to point cloud, which is a bunch of points in the air, and you can visualize trees and other landmarks from that. They also, the points bounce back at a certain intensity. And so in the LiDAR point clouds, you can see what the different tree species are. For instance, like hemlocks have like a really specific droopy cedar. The cedars, have like a longer.
It's fine.
droopy-
They don't like that.
Yeah, the cedars have like. Forest Service, and he worked with a student at a year or two ago, training Douglas for hemlock model, and that had accuracy in the mid-80s to distinguish between Douglas fir and western hemlock using the drone LiDAR. So it depends on the species that you're trying to differentiate between. When I was an undergrad at UW, I had a capstone project where we were looking actually using LTEP data and looking at red alders. And that was really nice because red alders deciduous, and when the LiDAR was flown, they didn't have any leaves, so it was leaf off condition. Comparing that to Douglas fir and hemlock, we got a 96% accuracy rate with the LiDAR, which was really nice. Yeah. So I've got hopes for the cedar. But yeah, you can theoretically use the LiDAR to do the species identification.
Bernard and I went to the Swiss needlecast project down there in Aberdeen, and that LiDAR was used to distinguish between Swiss needlecast and trees that were dying from other things. So it was really interesting.
Okay, that's great.
And when you're cedar tracking, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, I worked in the, what's now the experimental forest for 30 years, 70 to 2000. And pre-commercial thinning initially was selecting for Douglas fir first, hemlock and maybe spruce. Cedar was never really a part of that equation until about 1990. And then species diversity was recognized as, okay, yeah, if we see a cedar as an example, we should make sure, even though it isn't the biggest and brightest tree on the site, we should save those. And so through the 90s, and there was an awful lot of pre-commercial thinning backlog that we caught with in the 90s. It'd be interesting to look at those stands that were PCT through in the 90s and after. And then, you know, because there should be a higher incidence of cedar, so you go to places like the Octopus Flats, Nolan Creek, Claylock Creek, down the lower elevation, heavy to cedar, and there really should be a pretty interesting count there to pick up on more, and it's exactly the size of tree that there's Native American interest in as far as peeling. I mean, bark peeling trees are in this category, so there should be some of that around it. It'd be interesting to count heads.
Are there any more questions or clarification also on like ground truthing and LiDAR as well? Because you can explain it a little bit.
I
Simply
can
to-
pull up the LiDAR point cloud.
Well, I was just gonna add to sort of like what we're doing, like the purpose of what we're doing is. Like if you take T3, for example, is like a 20,000 acre site. That's a lot of trees, and that would take, I mean, an infinite amount of resources and time and energy to like go and do 18 by 18 meter like tree plots and get every single one of those trees. So like the purpose of LiDAR is taking like a smaller percentage and having like a lock and key situation where you can take this data and a much smaller amount. So let's say like, I think Ali mentioned it was maybe around 10%, which I don't know if it was like super accurate, but let's just say like you can get 10% of those trees in those 20,000 acres. So let's say you have like 2,000 acres worth of data and train it, so then the LiDAR can go and find it. So you don't need a physical like group of people to go find every single tree. That way the LiDAR can do it for you, like if that makes sense. The model can do it, so that way you don't have to go and get every individual tree. You just have to have enough to program the model, which is what we're doing. We're doing that ground truth and we're giving the data to the model to train it. That helps. Thanks for the information.
AI has taken over.
Yeah. In this case,
If I could jump in, yeah, I just want to let people know that cedar, we are very interested in cedar. We've got Allie working on her master's on cedar, and it's a big part of the T3 study too, where we're planting several hundred acres of cedar, some mixed with alder. And we're going to try to grow those on a longer rotation than the Douglas fir, maybe 65, 70 years, because it produces more valuable wood that way. And so we're very interested in cedar. And I think the question about what happened with the PCT shift in PCT that we heard a minute ago is a good question too. We need to, maybe we can talk to our source in more detail.
I'll do that.
Okay. I think that's it.
So when will we find out, is there any access to your data when you're collecting? Are you gonna have access to it?
That's an Allie, yeah, the question, yeah, I'm sorry, we didn't really answer that earlier. It depends, some of the data that we collected this summer, like the cedar, I'm going to be using this coming year, so I'll have results around springtime. The LTAP thing, I don't know, when exactly that's gonna be used and analyzed. Probably in the next couple of years. That would probably be a 20 question.
Yeah, I can I can jump in here. So the ethnoforestry field trials data is already worked up. We took another round of it this year, but the first 2 field seasons is already worked up. I've analyzed the data for the Sappho LTEP site in the early sterile and the plantation, Douglas fir plantation treatments, which they did not really work on that much this summer, but we've looked at tree growth and understory growth over time and some effects of soils and other things. So those pieces are already worked up and are all published in my dissertation, which I'm happy to link to. And then I think certainly in the next year, I would say we'll start to look at the wind throw data and the edge effect plots. Yeah, so certainly stay tuned. And if you're interested in any of the ethnoforestry or already worked up LTEP data, let me know.
Well, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you. You turn off your machines.
Yeah.
Unplug everything.
Everyone gets unplugged.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good job.